to address my question to Mr. Bajaj. He was talking about USA being dominant, and in Europe, France and Germany had the access. Here in Asia, we don't have that kind of singular domination. How would you suggest, as you are such a leading businessman, and you have, in Hindi we say, itna anubhav hai aapko, कि हम भी इस दौड़ में एक्सेस या किसके साथ ज्वाइन करें ताकि हम भी उस numero uno पे पहुँचें?
I mentioned was that if you need to be, I was talking of Asia, not India. India, I said, has a very important role to play. But for Asian century, meaning not an American century or a European century, you can't have, in my view, 6 leaders or 10 leaders. That's another situation in WTO. Mr. Lamy may or may not have liked it, neither Mr. Zolik, but we created the G20, the Brazils, the South Africans, and the Indians, not to fight the US and EU, but to be able to negotiate from an equal position of strength. And that succeeded. So there now, as I mentioned, I don't want to repeat what I mentioned, but China, India, ASEAN, Korea, even I'm not talking of Taiwan, there are so many of them with our diverse interests. Different levels of development is going to be a problem. But the other thing I would mention here in relation to what Surjit asked, that why did I emphasize domestic companies? Am I still talking of the wrongly understood Bombay Club? No. If there is the level playing field, yes, but if there is one world, I talk of the world company, not an Indian company. But if America talks of its farmers and its companies, and if Europe talks of its farmers and its companies, I think it will be highly stupid for us not to talk of Indian companies. Why are we ashamed of that? Openness is fine. I'm not parochial. I don't want to be narrow-minded. I don't want to be a protectionist. But let others do what they want. We will go the right way. That's what I meant by squeamishness. That others can do what they want. A few thousands or tens of thousands of farmers are important. Constituency is very important. I'm sorry, Pascal. But my 600 million farmers don't mean a thing. This is not on.
I wanted actually to ask Mr. Lamy a question and to pick up from the point that you made about the constructive role that our Commerce Minister had played in Geneva last July. You are briefly now a private citizen between having been a negotiator at the WTO and perhaps leading that organization. I'd like your honest opinion on the point that Mr. Bajaj has raised about India's true interests in trade and agriculture against the following context. India is still, as Mr. Bajaj has indicated, has many people in agriculture. India's role in the 21st century is going to be very powerfully determined by how we manage our agriculture. There are many of us who feel that indeed Indian agriculture would gain substantially by greater engagement with the world economy. But we find that our politicians are frozen in the headlights. How has China chosen to address this issue in its accession negotiations? What are they doing about adjustment in agriculture that India could emulate?
I'll answer your question, but let me first take the one which our moderator raised about openness. I mean, I don't think the case for openness is very difficult to be made. I mean, open people are nicer than others. Open economies are stronger than others. Open societies are happier than others. So that's, I think, it doesn't need a long demonstration. It's a bit different in trade, because paradoxically, when you translate trade not in morals, but in politics, it's the other way around. Trade is a very strange place where, in electoral terms, you've got the vast majority of people who benefit from opening trade, but who do not know it. Because as consumers, they catch the benefit of trade opening and economic efficiency. But it's written nowhere. When you go to your supermarket and you buy a T-shirt 30% less, nobody is going to tell you, you've got a rebate of 30% because of trade opening. You're going to be told, we've made a special effort for you and you have a good price. Now, the millions who benefit from trade opening do not know it. The few thousands, and there are few thousands everywhere, who suffer from trade opening, know it. It's visible. When you have to close a factory because a competitor has pushed you out of the market because of trade opening, everybody knows it. And everybody can blame trade opening for that. So there's an asymmetry in the politics of trade, not in the morals of trade, not in the economics of trade, but in the politics of trade, which needs special attention by public authorities and government. This is why I said that, in my view, trade as a public policy needs special care, special gardening, special nurturing, as compared to other fields of public policy. Now, to answer your question about India and agriculture, like most of the countries on this planet, not all, but most, India, in terms of international trade in agriculture, has a mix of offensive and defensive interests. On the one side, the huge importance of rural communities in these countries, the way they live, the traditions they have, the relationship they have to landscape, to family livelihood, to food, does not bode for strong trade opening. The way people farm, the way they eat is in economic conditions which probably would not match what Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, Argentina, some parts of US, some parts of Europe do in terms of efficiency. And there is a feeling in the farming population that there is a danger down there. Now, on the other side, India has an offensive interest. There are sectors in the agro-food business where India, regionally and worldwide, has a potential big comparative advantage because of know-how, because of climate, because of the capacity to produce and the difference with domestic production. Now, the real question for India is, how do I balance this? Because when you're in a trade negotiation, you need, at the end of the day, to make a clear choice of how much you are on the offensive and how much you're on the defensive to calculate your position. I think what happened last July in Geneva on the agricultural pillar of the negotiation was, let me say, cleverly done by India. The sort of mix of insurance policy for farmers through the creation of a new category in the tariff structure of agricultural products, which is special products, whose sensitivity in terms of the impact of trade opening and increased market access on rural communities has to be recognized, is a strong goal, which I think India scored in this negotiation. And it was very much sort of hand in hand with a country like Indonesia, for instance, who also has the same sort of pattern. On the other side, India still has to fight for two areas where India is more offensive, which is a reduction of trade distorting trade subsidies in US and Europe. And there, India and others extracted commitments from US and Europe in July, which are very welcome. And on the other side, on terms of market access, India has to try and make sure that in some areas where US or EU have what India believes are excessive tariff protection, then tariffs should be reduced. The key is in this balance. India is not like Brazil or Argentina, whose natural comparative advantage and the tradition and the way they farm makes them big winners in trade opening, and India is not like Japan or Korea, to take two Asian countries, where total trade opening in agriculture would wash out their farming constituencies.
My question refers to the point made by Mr. Yashwant Sinha, saying that the responsibility of the economic reforms in the country lies with the major political parties. My question is that, is it possible for any political party, whichever may come into government in future, to stop this process of economic reforms, which are basically driven or have been started or driven by the global factors?
The point which I made was about a strong consensus with regard to economic reforms in the middle of the political spectrum, because we are aware of the fact that there is opposition from the left to many of the economic reforms, and there is also opposition from the right. In fact, there is a left-right convergence with regard to this opposition, which is very strange. And therefore, I emphasized that this consensus in the middle must hold. You can't get through Parliament very important economic reform legislation if this consensus in the middle does not hold. And I'll tell you from personal experience that we could not have got the Insurance Regulatory and Development Bill passed through Parliament and made into an act if it had not been for the support of the Congress Party, which was in opposition then. So while the opposition from the left and the right might have its own or might generate its own political compulsions for whoever is in power, and they might be supporting it, it is this consensus in the middle of the political spectrum which is of critical importance. And therefore I said that I hope that this will not break, this will not crack, because if it cracks for reasons which are purely non-economic, with the reasons which could be political, therefore, in that contingency, passing of reform legislation, which is an integral part of the reform process, that will be jeopardized. When I was referring to political developments which might jeopardize this consensus in the middle, let me tell you, Rahul, that I had some recent events in mind which disturbed me. And that's why I also said that the responsibility for ensuring that this consensus holds is more on the ruling party, which might be part of the coalition. But it is certainly more on the ruling party, because in the opposition there is not very much that you can do. But from the government you are capable of doing much more damage.
You know, we increasingly are painting a very rosy picture all the time. And we keep on shifting the dates. We were talking about 2010 when India was to be a superpower. Now we are going into 2020. And the other dimension which we are talking about is the dimension of the population taking over, we becoming the most populous nation in the world. So, and when you see on the ground level realities are that the conditions have not very much changed. Added to that, what Honorable Mr. Yashwant Sinha has been pointing out, the contradictions and the difficulties which India may face if all those are not resolved. Do you still feel that the perceptions are very much in line with the reality, or the realities are different and we are trying to paint a rosy picture? Thank you. This is a question to all the panelists.
Well, in my intervention, I did try to point out the dangers that I saw. I see a very rosy future ahead of us. But there are certain things which must be attended to urgently. And if we let them be, then the progress will not be as steady and as speedy as we would like it to be. If let's say not 2010 or 2020, even 2025 or 2030 is the target date, then you know, if these problems continue, we'll only be postponing that final tryst with destiny. So it will get postponed by another decade, maybe 2 decades. And that's why we need speed in whatever we are doing. And it is very important because, let me also share with you a thought on this. It's all right, we have been talking a great deal about economics. But the politics of economics will always dominate economics. In our country, I can't see in the foreseeable future a time where politics will cease to play a very decisive role in economics or economic development. And that is why, you know, it worries me sometimes. And that is what we have to guard against.
Thank you. Thanks. How long are you here?